Hi, I'm Lauren. I co-founded Highend, a luxury resale marketplace that leverages AI to automate the authentication process. So I always knew I wanted to be a designer. I always had that creative space. But when I worked in the industry, it wasn't something that I quite enjoyed. Fraud's a huge problem and it's a growing problem, and it's not restrained to just the banking industry. It impacts all industries, in particular fashion now with counterfeits. Counterfeits are damaging to both brands and customers. If you're not listening to your customers and you're not providing value to them, they'll find someone else to shop from. To be careful with some of the smaller niche shops, whether they're physical or they're online. Running a group like that for 10 years really shows you all the different fraud use cases in the secondhand market. If you can win in your local environment, you can win in your global environment. Today, attention is a commodity, so you need to know how to grab attention. The AI market is a hot topic, and I think it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, for a good reason though. If I build in public, then someone's going to steal my idea. And to be completely transparent with you, if someone steals your idea and they execute before you, then that's probably your own fault. You should have worked faster and executed quicker.
Where big dreams meet bold action. Where we share real stories, actionable insights, and the inspiration needed to transform your ideas into businesses. Are you ready to turn your ideas into success and be an inspiration to others? Join Inspirepreneur.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I co-founded Highend, a luxury resale marketplace that leverages AI to automate the authentication process. So when I left school, I studied fashion. I was always wanting to be a fashion designer. That quickly changed once I went into the industry. I then went back to uni and studied physics, and I've been in AI tech ever since. So moved quite dramatically, I suppose, from fashion to physics, but now combining both of those goals and career goals with Highend today. Not necessarily fashion, so I always knew I wanted to be a designer. I always had that creative space, but when I worked in the industry, it wasn't something that I quite enjoyed, so I went to Europe to find myself, I guess, as every 20-year-old does, for a few months, and I ended up in San Francisco at Silicon Valley in a startup house for 2 weeks with a few Australian guys that were running a startup over there. And that's when I think I caught the startup bug, and it opened my eyes to what was happening at that point in time. It was probably 10 years ago, and Apple had just come out. They were just launching all their new products, so I was really getting exposure into the core of startups in Silicon Valley and their growth phase at that stage. And that's when I applied for the physics degree, and I really wanted to start getting into tech and building on that side of things from a startup space. And I came back to Australia, studied physics, and never looked back. So when I finished my physics degree, I've always worked in tech consulting, and I ended up at Macquarie Bank for quite a few years. I ended up managing the fraud data science team, and that's when I really started to think about how to solve the fraudulent problems, but from a fashion counterfeit perspective. And that's what's carried me over to Highend to solving the counterfeit issue globally. Yeah, so I would build different models around anomaly detection. So I was working in the wealth space. One of the products that I was working on was the CMA product, and we're building models to detect if an advisor had fraudulently deducted money from a client's account, which unfortunately does happen, and there's a few legal cases that we won't go into for that, but essentially building machine learning models to detect these anomalies and make sure that all the customers are protected from the bank's perspective. Yeah, fraud's a huge problem and it's a growing problem, and it's not restrained to just the banking industry. It impacts all industries, in particular fashion now with counterfeits, and it's growing year on year, where more people are being scammed into buying a counterfeit when they think it's a real product. So what I really was able to learn at Macquarie is understand the behavioural science behind it and how fraudsters think and what to look for and what not to look for in a fraudulent transaction, and that can be applied across multiple industries. Counterfeits are damaging to both brands and customers. So 10 years ago, the counterfeits were quite bad, and it was easy to determine what was real and what wasn't. And it was also only done on your high products, so your Rolexes or your Hermes or your Chanel, whereas today it's impacting every second brand. So you have a lot of Australian local brands like Zimmermann, Alame, Camilla Remarque that are either being duplicated or replicated in the counterfeit space. And this is really damaging to the brands because they need to be able to protect their IP, their revenue, and protect their customers, because what you see more often than not is that an individual is acting bad unintentionally. So they will purchase something from Facebook Marketplace or Depop without understanding that it is a counterfeit, and then they'll on-sell it on a platform like Highend. However, we will catch that and determine that it is fraud or a counterfeit item, and the buyer doesn't know or the seller doesn't know at the end of the day. So it's becoming a more lucrative business, I would say, in the fraudulent space. You can find a lot of super fake in the Amaz space that you can even spend $5,000 on. So some of these counterfeits aren't cheap, and they're very hard to detect with the human eye. Yeah, there's definitely competitors to Highend from the marketplace perspective. So one of our competitors would be The RealReal in the US. They're a consignment-based business, Vestiaire as well. But the big problem and the similarity that everyone has globally in the secondhand market is solving for authentication and counterfeits. Now, this impacts the secondhand fashion space, but it also impacts perfume space, the wine space, the stamp space. So counterfeits is an ever-growing problem globally from a depth and a breadth perspective. Highend started 10 years ago on Facebook as a Facebook group. It started with friends and family buying and selling our goods that you could not donate at that point in time because they still retained value. And that organically grew to 110,000 customers. It's a very engaged community that still exists today. And when we launched our marketplace app, we've been able to transition 40% of them within 12 months. Now, one of our secret sources at Highend is what we like to call intimacy at scale. So we are a local to local only platform. So you have platforms like eBay or The RealReal that are a global model. Now, there are a lot of fraud aspects when you think of a global model, and also security issues with customers. So we prefer to keep everything Australia to Australia only, so we can curate for the right brands, we can protect our customers, minimize fraud. And that's what we've found to work really well so far with the growth of Highend. We've grown so much in the last 12 months since we've launched. One of our marketing strategies to retain the trust of our customers is working with other well-known brands. So some of them being consumer brands like Three Warriors or Bang & Body, to make sure that we're leveraging the right audiences, and we're also providing value to our customers at the end of the day. One of our biggest value propositions is our customer and the community, so they feel like that we're not a faceless brand and they're seen at the end of the day. Exactly, the value chain goes both ways. If you're not listening to your customers and you're not providing value to them, they'll find someone else to shop from. So you would assume that if you're going into a store that you are buying a real item. If you are going into a Zimmermann boutique or a Chanel boutique, then yes, that is the case. But there have been issues in Australia and globally recently where you have gone into a multi-brand retailer and they are knowingly selling counterfeits. And if you go Tracy Grimshaw, it's been on a current affair. I won't name names of where that's gone down, but there have been a lot of retailers that are knowingly importing counterfeits and selling them as real goods. So their stock is actually made up of 50% of real goods, 50% of counterfeit goods. And as a customer, you don't know what's real and what's not real, because a lot of these counterfeits are often made out of good quality leather, the stitching's good. You wouldn't know, there's no university degree to understand of how to authenticate or not authenticate an item, which again is why it's so valuable for what we're building at Highend. So we're democratizing the use for authentication to absolutely everyone globally. Some retailers do it, it's physical and it is online. You have a lot of online stores that purely play in the counterfeit space and they'll advertise themselves as counterfeits, but you do unfortunately have a lot of trusted retailers that are selling counterfeit goods that shouldn't be. At the end of the day, they probably won't be in business for much longer, but as a customer, they don't know how to tell what's real and what's not. So there's nothing essentially stopping that business from continuing to do what they do. If you're looking to purchase a brand new product from a retailer, always purchase it from a reputable retailer. So David Jones, The Iconic, if you're overseas, Saks Fifth Avenue, Net-a-Porter, someone who's trusted in the space where they have methodologies in place to prevent fraud, and they wouldn't be selling these items. But you do have to be careful with some of the smaller niche shops, whether they're physical or they're online. If you haven't heard of them before, but they're selling designer goods at a discounted price, I would probably look into why it's discounted before you purchase. So Highend business actually started during COVID. I feel like a lot of businesses starting during COVID when everyone was at home. My co-founder Brooke started the Facebook group 10 years ago. My friend added me to this group 7 years ago when I was looking on the resale market for a few designer goods, but there were a lot of counterfeits and I wasn't quite sure what was real, what wasn't. And she added me to this Facebook group and said, you've got to check it out. Everything's curated, everything is authenticated, and it's a really trusted group. So Brooke and I became friends 6 or 7 years ago, and then in 2020 or 2021, I gave her a call just to ask how the group was growing. We were growing it to, over 100,000 users. And we're like, there's something here. We've proven validation in the market when you've got an eBay that exists, a Vestiaire collective that exists. So why are we still growing on this platform? There's got to be a business value proposition here that other people are not tapping into. That's exactly where we bred Highend from. And that's where our value proposition of community and intimacy at scale really came into place. But more importantly is automating authentication with AI. So now if you're playing in the secondhand market space, you really do have to authenticate your goods or else people won't trust you. And as an operator in the space, you need access to this technology to be able to scale and scale profitably, because what happens more often than not in this industry is you will have people manually authenticating. So the good will come to you, they will look at it, they're probably not accurately trained on that brand or that product, and they're just giving it their best guess, which obviously increases the risk, and it's also increasing the operational costs. And that's where they need this technology that we're building to lower operational costs, decrease fraud risk, and actually scale their businesses profitably. So we were really lucky that we were able to test our model on a free platform and a global social media platform before we raised capital and before we decided what to do with the business. It really helped us to validate what problem we were solving, if it was a valuable problem, who would pay for it and why people would pay for it. Running a group like that for 10 years really shows you all the different fraud use cases in the secondhand market. We've seen it all, I think. And it really enabled us to leverage our community to build what they want. So we would run surveys with them, we would run focus groups with them, speak to them about what they actually wanted for a resale from a resale platform, even though resale platforms existed currently in that space. And that's when we raised our first pre-seed capital round last year in May. We closed that very quickly in 4 weeks, and we've just officially celebrated 12 months in market with the app marketplace being live. Funding's hard, and it's not something that you do lightly. And I think sometimes people don't understand the distinguishing factor between a startup and a small business. So there's two different types of businesses. You can be a small business where you can bootstrap it, and as soon as you get revenue in the door, you can reinvest it in the company and you can probably sustain that growth. Whereas the other type of business, like a startup, you have many startups that are always in debt because you're always raising capital, because the type of business model it is to scale and go global within the period of time that you want to, you always need to be capital raising. We have a joke that you never stop capital raising. You're always either building relationships or seeding it for your next round, because you will never do one round of capital raise, or you should never do one round of capital raise. When you enter that space, you're entering a 10-year journey of multiple rounds of capital raising. It's not one and done. Now, Brooke and I, when we were ideating on the business and what we needed to do, we knew we wanted to go down the path of startup and capital raise so we can go global. We chose to go through high net worth for our first capital round. There's a few different strategies you can employ. You can do friends and family, so you can bootstrap it, which means that you fund it yourself. Maybe you've got $20,000, $50,000, or some family members that can chip in to help you get started. That's how most people start. You can also go down your high net worth family office space. Another angle would be through your angel investors. So these are people that maybe have exited as a founder. They might have a smaller check size. It's usually around $25,000, or you can go VC. Now, VC is your biggest path, which is venture capital. You can raise anywhere from $500,000 to $5 million. It depends where your company is at. But when you go down the VC path, you're on a different trajectory than if you are bootstrapping or doing a family and friends round. So I think it's really critical to understand, one, what path of capital raising you want to go down, two, how much you need, and also why. Because a lot of people can think that you need more than you do, or less than you do. And that's probably the dangerous end. If you only raise 200,000, but you really need $1 million to get to the next milestone, because that's how you've got to think about it. What is that next milestone you're going to achieve where you can raise capital again? You don't want to burn out. Your cash flow is absolutely everything. If you run out of cash, then you have no business. It's vital to test your idea. Otherwise, it's just an idea or a theory at the end of the day. If you haven't actually spoken to your customers and understand their pain point, then you're just building for something for yourself. And at the end of the day, as a sample size of one, it's not going to be a good business problem to solve. And I can tell you the amount of things that we have thought our customers would want, even from a product development roadmap perspective, once we actually speak to them, they don't care. They want something completely different. And that is critical in succeeding or failing for your business at the end of the day. So if you can leverage the free platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, to validate and test your idea, even if it's an incubation group of 100 people, that's better than one person as your sample size. I can guarantee you will learn so much before you then go to the next phase of building your business plan or speaking to investors and figuring out how you take that to market. I think one of the best pieces of advice I received was from the CEO of Airbnb in Australia, and she said, earn your right to exist from a free perspective before you invest in it. And that's whether you've raised capital or you haven't raised capital. There are so many free platforms you can leverage now to understand if your business model works, if it doesn't work, to learn. Social media being a key one. You can set up a camera and start filming, testing your ideas, asking people what they want, and they will tell you. So you can earn that feedback from them to better your business model, and it betters your chance for success. We're guided by our chairman, Gary Charney. He is also the chairman of the board of Centuria Capital, ASX listed company. I met him 3 years ago. We went for coffee maybe like once a month a few times. We had to see if it was a relationship, a business relationship we wanted to go into or not, because you have to remember at the end of the day, when you're speaking to these people that are much more well versed in this space than you, you're asking for their time. And more often than not, they do want to give it back to you, but they also need to be convinced and understand that you've done your due diligence and you are worth their time as well, and it's not a waste. Because what can happen a lot with startups is that it's a shiny new toy and people like the idea of it, but when it comes down to execution and commitment, it's a completely different story, because it is not an easy journey at all, and you have to really be willing to do whatever it takes to get to that point with your business. So my biggest point of advice would be network with everyone. LinkedIn, as much as people might hate LinkedIn, is my best friend. A lot of people out there have been through what you've been through before. Leverage that to learn from your mistakes. Don't make the mistakes the same time over. So we've got a great advice relationship with Gary. He's scaled businesses globally before. He's raised capital before, so he's helped us prevent a lot of mistakes from being made. But we also have leveraged relationship in different places like marketplaces like Airbnb or Woolworths to understand how they grow and scale and sustain their business. And also in the AI space. So we build a lot of models and AI models to deploy into our marketplace and soon to deploy from a business perspective. And we've had conversations with different people at certain universities that are in the research space who can really challenge us in what we're building so we can build a better model at the end of the day. I like reading books. I probably need to read more than I do. I have to say the books that I've more read are probably around like Einstein or Nikola Tesla or physics science books, because that's how my brain thinks. I like that logical challenge. And I also like reading books that are a little bit older or have been written in another generation, because it causes you to think in a different way. And I think that's what's key to really understanding how you can stand out in your business and create a new strategy that's going to work, is by thinking how people don't think, and thinking about how someone in the 18th century thinks, or someone who's a physicist, or someone who, I don't know, is a fashion designer. Everyone's got a different way of thinking. And what I really love to do by reading certain types of books, whether it's a new book or an old book, is challenging my way of thought. So I might have a solution to a problem, but that might not be right. So I'll speak to everyone who's got a different perspective than I do, or I'll read a certain chapter in a book and it causes me to really rethink how I'm structuring my thought and why that is the right way. Build in public. Use LinkedIn to build in public. Do not be ashamed. And the most common question that people have, and I actually thought about this before we started the business, was, if I build in public, then someone's going to steal my idea. And to be completely transparent with you, if someone steals your idea and they execute before you, then that's probably your own fault. You should have worked faster and executed quicker. There's no deficit to building in public. All it does is actually amplify your exposure, and you would be so surprised at who is keeping tabs on you. Since we've launched Highend, so many people that I thought would have no idea that I existed have reached out and said, I've been following your journey. I know what you're building, I know what you're doing, and they will offer to give advice. How I've really leveraged the platform is looking at either a founder who is a few capital raises ahead of me, who's been through it. It could be in the same industry, it could be an adjacent industry, and speaking to them and learning from their mistakes, understanding how they've gone through it. And I've honestly had such good feedback from every single person I've reached out to. And when you reach out to someone, they will always introduce you to someone else. So my advice would be, once you have that initial meeting, at the end of it, ask them to introduce you to at least one other person who would be beneficial to you in your space. And you never get a no. Everyone in this space wants to help everyone else. They're all going through the same process and the same challenge. They want to see you succeed. So ask the questions, even if you're embarrassed or you feel like that the answer might be no. ask them to introduce you, and your network will just grow organically from there. You have to build in public. That's, if you want a strong business that's going to succeed, you have to do it, because you have to challenge yourself. You then need to ask yourself why you wouldn't do it. And if your primary concern is that you think someone's going to take your idea, you're going to have to speak to VCs, you're going to have to speak to advisors or other founders at the end of the day. And if you don't share your idea, they're going to have no idea what you're doing. No one can read your mind. And I was having a conversation this morning with someone who runs a program in Australia, SBE, it's in the US as well. And she said one of their cohorts was full of all the same founders in the same industry. They're all HR, and everyone thought, you're crazy, why, we're all competitors here, why are we in the same space? But you know what, that actually challenged them all to understand, do they have a business model worth building? How can they differentiate themselves? Because at the end of the day, you are always going to have competitors. There are new people playing in the space, there are existing people playing in the space. You need to really challenge yourself of how you can stand out, and building in public is the best way to do that. We've converted 40% of the Facebook group, so we have 40,000 app downloads within 12 months, which we're very proud of. We've got a great organic strategy for acquisition, which is the best type of acquisition you can have from the Facebook group. Brooke and I, my co-founder, are very active. We talk to our customers every single day so they feel seen, and also we're building what they want at the end of the day. And we also have a 40% repeat buyer rate, which is unheard of for this type of industry. Usually someone might transact once and they won't come back for another 12 months, but we have a very highly engaged community, which we had on Facebook, and we've now been able to replicate on the marketplace app. There is a counterfeit story that I will talk about. And again, this does nothing but help make our solution more robust in the counterfeit space for what we're building. So we had someone who had purchased a Chanel handbag off Facebook Marketplace years ago. She tried to list it on our platform for $5,000. It looks really good. It came with a box, a receipt from Saks Fifth Avenue in New York. But once we got that handbag and we put it through the AI model, it determined that it was actually a super fake. Now, a super fake, it looks incredible. The receipt looks good. The leather is there. It's the right quality, but there's just something off. It could be the stitching, it could be the font type, it could be the layout or the structure of the receipt that tipped it off. And unfortunately, that seller, they weren't intentionally selling something that was a counterfeit, but they had been duped by someone else on another platform for thousands and thousands of dollars. But then at the end of the day, both the buyer and seller were very grateful that it was caught. But I think that just illustrates how expensive this problem of counterfeits in market really is. So we haven't now, but we do plan to associate brands in the future. So you're reading 6 months into the future. A big issue that brands have in this space, whether you're a Chanel or you're an Alame or Zimmermann Australian brand, is that it's brand damaging. They need ways to protect themselves, because what happens is their customer unknowingly buying a counterfeit on the secondhand market, which leaves a bad taste in their mouth, and it also is revenue cannibalizing for the brand. So we know now brands in Australia are even hiring people full-time in-house just to look at these platforms to understand what's going on. So at your DHgate or your Temu platforms, to see what is being counterfeited, how quickly, and to what quality. So this is still a blind spot that exists for brands today, and that's where Highend comes in to partner as a data play to give them information on what's happening on the secondhand and counterfeit market that they wouldn't be aware of. And then they can then in turn change their processes, make their IP a little bit more robust, and also protect their customers. So as an example, you could have our technology embedded into the Alame website. So if I'm a customer and I wanted to purchase a secondhand Alame good, I could use this technology on the Alame website to upload the images, and it can tell me if it's real or not. So all that does really is build the strength and the trust and the connection between brand and customer more over time, whilst allowing them to still partake in the secondhand market. So our marketplace, we are restraining to Australia because we've got great brand value here and we are able to deploy intimacy at scale. We're not taking the marketplace globally, but what we are taking globally are our AI tech stack of tools. So there's no one that really plays in that middle market space globally today. So if I wanted to authenticate a Zimmermann dress that I purchased on the secondhand market, I would have to call Brooke, my co-founder, and say, do you think this is real? Which I do all the time if I'm shopping at the market. Or there's websites that exist where I upload images, but again, there are people behind that, and they essentially are a community that might get back to you 24, 48 hours later and tell you if it's real or if it's not real. So in terms of automating the fraud detection space for your middle market, nothing does exist, whether it's in Australia or globally, that brands like David Jones, Net-a-Porter, eBay or even Zimmerman can plug into their platform, because it's a very new problem in this space, because these brands only begun being counterfeited a couple of years ago. It's not something that's been around for 10 plus years. One of the best things about launching the Highend marketplace, since we did so 12 months ago, I would have to say, has been connecting with everyone in person in our community. A part of our marketing strategy is experiential marketing, so we do a lot of physical activations, one being at Fashion Week this year, which we are doing again next year. We're partnering with a few other brands for that. We put on free coffees for our customers, we'll give them flowers, we'll talk to them, we'll interview them, and it's been incredible just to connect them in person, not just digitally, because that really does help us understand what to build for them, and also strengthens a connection for them to Highend. So our plan for the next couple of years is to go international. We have a very aggressive plan, but a good plan. We're taking our AI technology to the business space, which is something that no one has ever done before. So if you are a brand like Alame, you can utilize this technology. If you are a multi-brand retailer like David Jones, you can utilize this technology to reduce your fraudulent returns. If you are Saks Fifth Avenue, Net-a-Porter, or The RealReal in the States, you can also utilize this technology. So our aim is to automate authentication digitally, so you don't need to have the physical product in your hands. And now this will reduce fraud by 90% in the counterfeit space, and also reduce these brands' operational costs. So this really is a disruption to how the process currently works in the second-hand market, and allows them to scale without increasing the risk. Brands are able to reach out to us through our website. There's an EOI that you can essentially submit, and we'll set up a meeting to work with them to understand what their problem is, if our solution can solve it for them, and how we do that. You also see a lot of brands now wanting to tap into the resale space or the rental space, but they're not sure quite how to do it, because there is a lot of risk associated with it. So if you're a brand and you're wanting to open up the second-hand market where a customer can bring back a product, you will need this technology essentially to determine if the product they're listing is real or if it's counterfeit on their platform, because otherwise it causes distrust if you have that issue. So they can reach out to us and we can speak to them about building this API and technology into their platform to retain the trust and reduce fraud risk. One thing I think it is very beneficial for are up and coming brands. So what you see more often than not now, especially with virality and social media, is that you might have a new independent label that's only been around for a couple of years, but then they get one dress that they make that goes completely viral, and then you will see that being counterfeited within a month. Unfortunately, when you're an independent brand, you don't have the funds or the knowledge really to protect your brand IP. So if that's something that is occurring to a brand, they could reach out to a company like Highend, and we can work with them to make sure that they are protected from this scenario and their customers aren't open to the fraud risk. Exactly, because there's new counterfeits every single day. New brands are popping up and there's new counterfeits being produced. So if you're an independent label and counterfeits are only just starting in your space, you can actually get ahead of the game to make sure that you're always protecting your customer by working with a company like Highend, so your fraud risk is reduced from day dot. It's a business and the brand in terms of reducing fraud risk and increasing their brand protection, I would say. So do you want me to do another intro with that, or no? Yes, the counterfeit industry, it's actually 3.3% of total global trade. Fun fact, it's bigger than the drug industry, so it is a very big industry for counterfeits, and it definitely has to be solved for. So fashion makes up majority of that space, and it's high frequency transaction. Every single day someone is either knowingly or unknowingly buying a counterfeit, and by introducing an automated technology like what we have at Highend, you are reducing the fraud risk. So there's about 80% of that middle market that can be solved with this solution, and because it's automated through an API, you can leverage it through any geography. You can use it if you're in the US, you can use it if you're remote, you can use it if you're in the UK. You don't physically need the device, or you don't physically need the product to be able to authenticate it in person. One of our key points when we were designing this solution was to ensure that you did not need the product in your hand, because that is such an issue and a blocker for companies to scale. Or as a customer, maybe I'm purchasing something on Facebook Marketplace and I want to know if it's real before I even purchase that product. Or if I'm in eBay, a marketplace platform, I don't have the products physically, so I'm not able to actually authenticate from that perspective. So that was a really key driver when we're designing this solution, that it has to be effective from a digital perspective and not a physical perspective. Now this changes the game with what is existing in market. If you want to authenticate most of these goods today, you do need to have the product physically in person. And for some products like a Rolex or an Hermes, you will need those physically because the counterfeits are so good. There are super fakes, or there are certain types where the watch face might be real, but the mechanics underneath might be counterfeit. So there's different things you need to pull apart. But for your middle market, if you're looking at Zimmerman, Marc Jacobs, Realization Par, you can solve that digitally, and that's what we're solving for. If you're a startup and you're raising funds, you need to get all of your tax and everything in order, and you need to understand why an investor would look at you. So there are certain things you can do, like applying for ESIC, which is a tax break for some of your investors, depending on how much they invest. If you're approved if you are approved as an innovation company. So definitely apply for that through the government, and you can also apply for different grants like the R&D, which is a research and development grant, because there's a lot of funding involved in that really gives investors confidence at the end of the day that you are building something innovative, you're a company worth investing in, and you're a company that can scale globally. Is that just like the intimacy? I would say it's the same sort of thing with intimacy at scale and your marketing. So where Highend really differentiates is that we call it intimacy at scale as our value proposition. And we also run experiential marketing campaigns. So we like to be in touch with our customer. We like to provide value back to them. We're not a faceless brand where we're just a marketplace that is disconnected to the customer, and that's what really makes us different both here in Australia, and if we were to replicate the model globally, that would also be a big point of difference, because we are a local to local market model, which means that we do not do cross-border shipping. So if you're buying or purchasing from someone in Australia, they could be in New South Wales or they could be in Victoria, there's nothing internationally, so you don't have to wait a month to get your item. If you need it for the weekend, you can buy it and you can have it for this weekend. There's definitely less females in any space, globally or in Australia. I think the statistic is less than 2% of females get funded. So if you're sitting in the 2%, congratulations, that is a very big feat. The industry is changing for the better. There are a lot of mentors and a lot of advocates in the space, which is really good to see. So if you connect with the right people and the right mentors, they definitely will be able to guide you in the right way. Because if you think about it, by default, men and women approach things differently. So typically as a female, you will solve a problem you've felt yourself. Typically as a male, you will solve a problem that you've seen. So we both have very different approaches to solving problems in business and startup, and also how we conduct ourselves in meetings. So learning how that works to your benefit is crucial before you go through these startup phases and pitch for funding, or you're building your business, because there are a lot of benefits associated to being a female founder. The Australian market, you have to be resilient. If you're not resilient as a founder, unfortunately, you will not make it. And you do need to make sure that you focus. So there will be things that happen every single day that will cause you to dip emotionally, but you've got to make sure that you are always remaining the same and do not let it actually impact you, because you will have good days, you will have bad days, and just know that everyone has gone through the same process and you're not the only one. And especially in the Australian market, brand is so important here, and something that Australia is actually recognised for globally is for having good and quality brands. So if you look at some Australian fashion brands like a Zimmerman, for example, and you go to the US or you go to the UK, they love these brands because they're known for quality, they're known for trust, and that's what you also have to replicate, whether you're a marketplace model like Highend, if you're a fashion tech AI model, or whatever your business is. That really is the strength of the Australian ecosystem. So you need to make sure that you're tapping into that and playing there, because what happens more often than not is if you can win in your local environment, you can win in your global environment. So making sure that you've got a strong brand identity and quality of brand in Australia will really help you stand out. Today, attention is a commodity, so you need to know how to grab attention. Social media is the best way to do that. So as we were saying before, test your idea on social media, especially with your target market. So understand what the problem is you're solving, but also who you're solving it for. So let's say that your target market is Gen Z, they're more likely to be on TikTok. If your target market is Gen X, they're probably more likely to be on Facebook. So understand where your customers or potential customers are using these channels and leverage these channels. The cosmetics industry, I would say you see more dupes than counterfeits. So they're two very different things. Dupes, they're replicating the product, but not necessarily the brand. Counterfeits are replicating both. They're replicating both the brand and the product itself. One industry you do have, which is in the cosmetics industry, that is highly counterfeited, are perfumes. So you will see a lot of perfumes now that are counterfeited, especially some of the European perfumes, and they're not cheap. They're like $500 a bottle, and people are selling them all the time on secondhand markets, but they don't know how to tell what's real or what's not real until you receive the product and you smell it and it smells a little bit off. Something's wrong. But I would say anything outside of the fashion space and in the cosmetic space, perfumes are definitely the most highly counterfeited product. Yeah, that's the challenge in the perfume space. They'll think of a similar formula and they'll be able to replicate it, but what they might not be able to replicate is all the tones and the notes, but also the length of that perfume. So sometimes if you put a counterfeit or a cheaper perfume on, it might disappear after half an hour, or it will start to smell a little bit sour. But when you're purchasing a product online or even just in store, you don't know if it's real or if it's not, because you haven't had that experience yet. You need to wait a few hours to see if it smells a little bit off or if there is an issue. I think the only way to determine if a perfume is counterfeit and you're buying it online would be looking at the bottle itself. Is it a glass bottle? Is it a metal bottle? Look at the font, see if there's any discrepancy, similar to what you do in the fashion space. But perfumes are a very lucrative counterfeit space, I would say. Absolutely. So the AI technology we have, there are a lot of applications you can use it for. So we are focusing on the fashion space, but you could use it in, say, the perfume space or the wine space. There's a lot of counterfeits in wine or stamps. So the breadth of the problem for counterfeits is huge. 3.3% of total global trade is a very large market. Not only is it a large market, but it's growing 13% compound annual growth rate year on year. So it's not going away, it's actually getting worse, which is why you need a solution like what we're building now for your businesses to actually scale profitably. AI market is a hot topic, and I think it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, for a good reason though. But you also need to make sure you're validating your problem before you even dive into it. I think a lot of people think AI can solve absolutely everything. It can solve a lot of things, but not everything just yet. So make sure you validate your problem. And then second to that, I would make sure that AI is your solution. So a lot of people think that it can solve their problem, but they haven't actually done the due diligence to understand if it's the right solution or the wrong solution, because you can use it for a lot of components of your problem, but maybe it's not the most efficient or the best way to actually solve for your problem, and they just want to use it because of the hype of what's going on. If it is the correct solution for your problem, post that, I would start testing your build. So data is everything, and something you also need to be conscious of in this AI space is your IP. So if you're using an LLM, like you're using ChatGPT or plugging into Anthropic to build your solution, you need to be careful of what data you're plugging into that environment, and if that data is protected. There's a lot of data laws globally now, and there's also a few more coming into Australia, so be very careful about what data you're putting into some of these AI models and what you're protecting in your own environment. The government platforms are the best place to go to. They will also update you on any potential upcoming challenges that they're trying to sort through. So globally, that's your best point to look at what is happening in the US or in the UK or Europe, because more often than not, it will then come to Australia. But definitely keep updated on the government pages, as boring as they are. They will tell you exactly how it is and what you need to look out for and don't look out for. A big problem is new brands in market. So what happens now in the space of social media is the speed to market for counterfeits is scarily quick. So you could post something on TikTok, it goes viral, and someone has counterfeited it in the next week. Now, as an independent brand, you need to work with someone like Highend to be able to solve that problem. Otherwise, you've got no way of actually protecting your customers or protecting your brand identity at the end of the day, because these customers might go to the counterfeit site instead of your site for buying the product. So making sure that you have those relationships with brands that you can build on as soon as it happens, you can actually prevent the fraud from occurring in the counterfeit space. I would say the best advice, honestly, is networking, and everyone probably rinses and repeats that over and over and over again, but there is a reason for it. And everyone is so supportive in this space. So do not be scared. Go to the free events, especially in the tech space. So I'm a female in tech. There's a lot more males in this space, but there are so many events to go to. You look at the big companies like Google or Microsoft or Amazon, they are putting them on every single week, and they're free. And the amount of people there that you can connect to that are technical or non-technical is crazy, and they will always introduce you to someone else, and I can guarantee you will leave far better off than before you came. Work for someone while you're building your idea. So I worked at Macquarie full-time whilst we were building Highend. And the reason for that was that we wanted to actually validate the problem and see if we could dive into it. There's nothing worse than diving in too early and realizing that there's not actually a problem to be solved for, or your solution is about 6-12 months away from being ready. So do it on the side. There's so many events you can go to at night. You should be able to spend a couple hours a day on networking with people or your lunch breaks. You'd be surprised how many people at your work also might have a side hustle or a different business. A lot of people that I worked with at Macquarie went through programs or had a secondary business, because I feel like when you meet founders, they've always had multiple jobs. So have multiple jobs, don't just settle for your one job, and that's how you'll grow both spaces, because both are equally important. You need to develop your commercial assets and acumen from my experience, it was Macquarie Bank, and then you also need to develop your startup space because they're two very different skill sets, but if you can build both at the same time, then that's the best way to do it.